It's a tendency that I see over and over again with data analysts, with data scientists, where they look at the data and what I hear back is restatement of the facts. So it's very comforting to tell me back what someone reads from the data. And usually my response to that is, you've been closer to the data. You've been analyzing through the data. Don't tell me just what's in the data, but what do you think does it mean? And often the key there is pouring in judgment. And that's a skill that many people are lacking in thinking, looking at data, but pouring into it the context of the business, the context of the environment, and what really does it mean for us.
Hello listeners, Fahad Ahmed here, and welcome back to our series of episodes that explore Columbia Business School's key pillars of learning. They are the digital future, entrepreneurship and innovation, 21st century finance, the intersection of business and society, and climate and sustainability. In this episode, we're continuing our deep dive into the pillars, this time discussing the digital future. And on this episode, we're going to drop in on a conversation between professors Oded Netzer, Christopher Frank, and Paul Magnone, as they discuss key points from their new book, Decisions Over Decimals, which offers a roadmap for effective decision-making when using data. Professor Netzer is CBS's Vice Dean for Research, while Christopher Frank is Vice President of Amex Insights at American Express, and Paul Magnone is Head of Global Strategic Alliances at Google in the cloud business. Together, they teach the CBS course, Leading in a Data-Driven World, Being Fearless and Fierce with Data. And on this episode, we'll hear how data underlies most business decisions today and why no leader can operate a successful 21st century business without the insights that data can provide. Let's join their conversation hearing why they wrote this book and their guidance for handling the wealth of data in almost every industry today. Here's Vice Dean Oded Netzer.
We've noticed that there is a struggle. There's a struggle with making decisions with data, and part of the struggle is because people tend to think that they need to be math whiz in order to deal with data. They need to be this Excel whiz in order to be able to deal with data, and that couldn't be far from the truth. We've noticed that people believe that the skills needed to make decisions with data are not actually the right skills, which led us to ask ourselves, what are the skills? Why are we having more data than we ever had, and yet decisions that don't seem to become better than they were?
And just to orient your ears, here's Paul Magnone, followed by Christopher Frank.
And candidly, we have colleagues who say, how did you get to a better decision? And I think we all realize that there's a lot of waste in the business world, how decisions are made. And I, for one, am fatigued by all the wasted time and the lack of efficiency and the lack of focus. And so what we're hoping to do is not just put out a really solid work, but hopefully convert some folks into making decisions in a better way as an overall group, start a new tribe.
I almost think that's the problem that we're trying to solve. You know, how many meetings, and we're all in meetings, regardless of the company, regardless of the type of organization, that you sit in these meetings and there is, no decisions or partial decisions, or you think you actually make a decision. And how often do you leave the room, virtual room or not, and then you walk back and that decision gets walked back? And how do you actually make a decision that sticks and that people feel comfortable making?
Yeah, the problem is that we tend to drown in data these days. Start with a decision. Ask yourself, what is the decision I need to make? What data can help me make that decision? And then focus just on the data and just on that analysis, as opposed to seemingly benefiting from the wealth of data.
So I also think not only having a common framework, and it will enable people to work together and be much more effective and productive. But I think there's another key thing is, the speed of decision making. And that is an absolutely fundamental problem we collectively have to work on. I mean, business is working faster, data is flowing at an even greater rate in terms of volume and velocity. Yet, decisions almost seem slower. So there's this tension that exists. And what we're trying to share are really practical lessons or framework to help relieve that tension.
I mean, thinking of this problem of speed, this problem became way worse with the availability of data because suddenly we have so much data. We feel like we can use it in order to increase the certainty, in fact, getting to the certain decision, which is a myth. And we have so much data, so many ways to analyze this data. And that's a way to procrastinate, a way to delay the decision by looking for more data, by looking at more analysis that hopefully would make us more certain with our decision making, and often it doesn't.
Here's what I loved from that portion of their conversation. Ask yourself, what decisions do you need to make, and what data sets can help you make those decisions? But don't let the wealth of data overwhelm or slow your decision making. Let's skip ahead and learn about the human element in data-backed decision-making, because at some point in the process, there's a human-made decision. The question is, can this be taught? Well, here's Professor Netzer.
Yeah, I mean, intuition is almost primal. Can we teach something that is that primal as intuition? The theory of learning tells us that there are two dimensions to learning. There is consciousness and competence. At the lowest level of learning, we are so clueless that we are unconsciously incompetent. We don't even know what we don't know. And then maybe we are opening a book called Decisions Over Decimals, and we see a few titles to the chapters, quantitative intuition. I still don't know what it is, but at this point, I move to be maybe consciously incompetent. At least I know what I don't know. I start reading chapter number 1, chapter number 2, and I'm starting to become consciously competent, meaning I'm learning new things. It's still really hard. That's why it's consciously competent. At the highest level of learning, once we keep practicing as we have been doing now over quite a few years, it becomes second nature. It becomes habit. It becomes intuition. So this is our path to move from learning something new to intuition. And we've all done that. We've all done that with walking. It was consciously difficult at start. Most of us have done it with driving. So we learn these skills over and over again.
We all talk about the availability of data, and we all talk about being overwhelmed with that volume of information. There's actually a great quote from Einstein that if he had to solve a problem, he would spend 90% on framing it and thinking about the problem, and only 10% on actually doing, working through a solution. And IWIC, which stands for I Wish I Knew, is a very simple technique to actually help you frame a problem. But really, what is a frame? A frame is simply you're narrowing what you're going to focus and what you're going to solve. And it kind of ties back to what you said earlier, Oded. Too many people see the data and they dive right in. So IWIC is this technique when you go in and you talk to your stakeholders, clients, colleagues. It works with fellow students if you're about to start a project. And it's a simple 4-word question that you ask, what do you wish you knew? And what you're trying to get at is the essential information. What do you wish you knew to move forward? If I could provide that answer to you tomorrow, end of the week, whatever it may be, but near term, what do you wish you knew to move forward? And then that also serves as a governor or a regulator on the information flow and what you have to analyze. So very quickly and very effectively, by asking this 4-word question and applying this technique across teams, across business units, you can get down to that essential information that you need to move forward, as opposed to drowning in the information that exists.
And I love the word wish in there because it implies permission, not answer what you already think you know, but what is it that is ruminating in the back of your mind that you don't think you can ask, but you really can. The other piece is that we layer these techniques upon each other. So we also like to talk about what happens in the decision moment and recognizing that a decision happens when we bring together time, risk, and trust, and you triangulate on those 3. So you take the output of an exercise like an IWIC and the very rigorous data analysis. And then you have to ask yourself from a human judgment perspective, is this information I trust? Are these people that I trust? What is the risk profile of this? What time frame do I need to make a decision in? And once you understand that, it's not an amorphous decision that is boundless, but you really zero in on a tight time frame and the parameters that matter. So you make the decision for the right people with the right conditions.
I mean, the one theme that actually goes throughout the book is this theme of powerful questions. And in fact, if we go through the book, it's a sequence of questions that go towards what is the essential question, tools like iWeeks. As we get to the data analysis, how do we interrogate data? A sequence of questions. What data am I not seeing? What is the context for this data? A type of question that we ask around data interrogation. What surprised me in the results? And a very powerful question to get to the heart of almost any issue with data analysis, what surprised you? And finally, as we move towards the decision, questions like, what does it mean? What does it mean for the company? Meaning moving from what to so what to now what? These are a series of questions that involves in pretty much the entire sequence, going from the essential question all the way to the decisions, which is pretty much a theme that goes throughout the book, thinking about powerful question, using questions in order to advance the dialogue.
This is not about asking precision question and getting an answer immediately, but really opening up dialogue. If you use some of these techniques and you say, listen, I have an hour-long meeting, and I frame it appropriately and I set the table correctly for the right kind of conversation, what normally takes an hour, which is repetitive and you're frustrated because the meeting takes an hour and you haven't really had the right conversation, you condense that down into what is crystalline and clear in 10 minutes. And then you open up the next 50 minutes for real discussion. And I think that's the magic, opening it up for real discussion.
The smartest person in the room doesn't have the answer. They actually ask a question. Why? Because a question shows, one, they're thinking very deeply about the problem or data or the discussion at hand. The second thing that a question does is it opens up the dialogue, to your point, Paul. And we equate questions almost to like a camera lens. And you could, open up the aperture, widen the discussion, or then you could then zero in. And often we are the recipient of the information and we just think we have to take it in. Yet we want to engage in that discussion. We're trying to figure out when and how do we engage. Questions enable you to engage in a very meaningful way to expand that dialogue.
And one of the other interesting aspects here is think about any meeting that you're in. It's summary. People are summarizing. They're often summarizing what they already know. They're summarizing what they think people want to hear, and there's not synthesis. And if you can correlate appropriately through some of the techniques that we're talking about, and you open up the dialogue for actual synthesis and real creative thought, that's the win. That's what's helpful to companies.
Yeah, and it's a tendency that I see over and over again with data analysts, with data scientists, where they look at the data and what I hear back is restatement of the facts. Why? Because restatements of the facts is factual, by definition of the word. Factual, as long as the data are true, the facts will be true. So it's very comforting to tell me back what someone reads from the data. And usually my response to that is, you've been closer to the data. You've been analyzing through the data. Don't tell me just what's in the data, but what do you think does it mean? And often the key there is pouring in judgment. And that's a skill that many people are lacking in thinking, looking at data, but pouring into it the context of the business, the context of the environment, and what really does it mean for us.
What's clear to me from this exchange is that how we use data to ask questions to guide and encourage discussion and debate is just as important as how we use data to make decisions. The two go together. Allow your data analysis to open the aperture, as Christopher Frank suggests. Let's hear more from these three professors, but this time specifically on what they are looking for when they are hiring.
I have a question directly for the two of you. You are hiring our MBAs. What do you think are the skills that are in this book that our MBAs are missing? What would you want to see from our MBAs when you are hiring them for these positions?
One thing I look for when I am interviewing is, can someone bring synthesis? And synthesis is data plus judgment. And judgment, people, it's a bit scary at times, but I'm looking for someone to have confidence, and judgment is a perspective. I think the other thing that judgment is, and how do you actually demonstrate judgment? There is a very simple, approach to do it is ask yourself, instead of just showing or talking about an example or a data point from your career, your CV, your education, tell me, so what? What does it mean? And then tell me, now what? And if you actually apply that to some of your answers and talk about the impact, they're starting to demonstrate that level of judgment rather than just, oh, let me just jump in and solve the problem. Those are the candidates that are giving me the thoughtful answers that I am looking for. And kind of a bonus answer to your question, the candidates that actually ask me questions, that says a tremendous amount to me about who they are and how they think. And I will often create that opportunity right up in front. And I'm like, this is your career, talking about this great opportunity. Do you have any questions? And I cannot tell you how often candidates just sit there and say, no, I'm good. Versus you get those individuals just say, you know what? I actually just read this about your company last week. I would really appreciate your perspective on X and what it could mean for your competitive position. Let me tell you, that candidate is off to the races for me personally.
Yeah, and what's happening when there's this free flow of questions, you're understanding the thought process. So we want to know that you can think in times when there's uncertainty. There was no textbook that described how to solve this problem. So your thought process is what matters most because we're breaking new ground every day.
And the way we often, by the way, think about it here at Columbia Business School is that we are training our students to become chefs rather than cooks, right? A cook, you give them a recipe and they know very well how to make it, right?
Right.
Unfortunately, the problems you're going to face out there, right, would not be the same recipes that I gave you in school.
Yeah.
So our goal is really to create chefs as opposed to cooks, which means teaching you this software or the other is teaching you to be a cook, right? It's the ability to actually face uncertainty in new situations.
So I'll tell you who we're not interested in hiring. Certain personas that we've talked about in class, people like Captain Obvious, who simply restates what we already know and chews up time. Or Seymour, someone who just wants to see more data. Regardless of what the answer is, they just want to see more data. And you know a few of these people as well.
I know them. I've presented to them. Another persona, whether you're, and this comes through in interviews, this comes through in meetings, someone we affectionately call Billy Numbers. Just show, give me the numbers. I want to know to the third degree, or they come in with, this spreadsheet, and they're like, 6-point font does exist in Excel. And I'm like, you're missing the big picture, because there is one essential question that collectively we are all trying to answer, in business is, how do we help our organizations grow? Whether you're a nonprofit, regardless of the industry you're in, how do we grow? How do we have greater impact? Whether it's greater impact on society, greater impact on our business, greater impact in helping our colleagues and team members grow. And you're not going to get that from more numbers and just bringing in more data. So I'm actually would love to share a real world example from all the work we have done. I used to lead the Global Satisfaction Measurement Program in 47 geographies, both consumer and B2B. Tremendous data set, more data, significant base sizes. We could model, and we did that, 9 ways to Sunday. And when I was presenting this, I thought I was all buttoned up. I came in with the 50-page deck, looked at the data many different ways, and we were wrapping up, and it was an okay presentation. And the GM at the time asked me one question. He's like, Chris, anything that surprised you in the data, anything that you didn't understand? And I'm like, actually, there was. And of these 47 markets, in 8 of them, the data just did not follow the pattern of the majority. So I explained it away because I couldn't explain it. And by explaining it away, I mean, I put it in the appendix. And I looked, at a global basis, we're doing great with consumers. And at a global basis, we're doing great with B2B customers. And he's like, what were those markets? So I went into the back of the appendix. And as I read off the markets, he leaned over to his chief of staff and they started checking off boxes. And one by one, he's like, each one of those markets that you could not explain and that was surprising to you, actually, we ran a pilot program we did not tell anyone about. They did not want to bias the data in any way. And they had double-digit increases. And it turns out that those 8 test markets turned out to be exactly the foundation for a very successful program they wound up implementing. And from that simple question, what surprised you, opened up the dialogue, gave me permission as the analyst at that time to share what I didn't know and create that safe space from a simple 3-word question. And then it really spawned a rigorous discussion, investment, and actually launch of a global program.
So I have a story from when I was leading some business due diligence of a Silicon Valley company that my company was looking to utilize. And there was some discussion on whether we should just license their technology or perhaps buy the company. So a lot of interesting pressure around that. And in driving the business due diligence, we spent time with the company. Our technologists looked and said, it's interesting, but ambivalent about it. We didn't really get a sense for the economic value of the new technology that they had and how grounded it was in reality. Could this really be applied today? So the business development lead on their side sent me a spreadsheet. And he said, listen, this is the model for the business. He said, put in however many servers, again, it was a technology base, put in however many servers you think you will use this software with, and you will model out the profitability. So I opened up the spreadsheet. Every field was locked except for that one field. It's preloaded with 10,000. The assumption was that, like any greedy individual, I would go up from 10,000 and say, oh, well, 10,000 is profitable. How profitable is 100,000? How profitable, what's the return on investment on having 500,000 servers using this technology? Because it all looked great. So I put in 500,000 to see where it went, but I also put in 1 and 0. Amazingly enough, regardless of what number I put in, it was a wildly profitable company. Yes, with 0 servers, it was a wildly profitable return on investment. And that took 5 minutes. So 5 minutes later, I called him up and I said, either your spreadsheet is broken or your company has a problem. And I said that in a provocative way because our instincts led us to believe that there was something that they were withholding. And that led to a whole series of other conversations where we really did discover what was wrong. So it is that pressure testing, not taking for granted, here are numbers that I want you to look at, not anchoring on what they're saying, but really looking at parameters that matter for you and a practical sense. Why do I want to put in 1 in a field like that? Because if I can understand the unit of 1 and what that means to my company, then I can do my own math. I can extrapolate out, this is what it means to drive the business the way we want to drive the business.
Being prepared as MBA students, as working professionals, and even asking that of yourself will really enable you to make sure that you're well prepared, you have a well thought out strategy, and demonstrate mastery of your recommendation.
One way actually in which Amazon is doing this is something called PRFAQ, which is very consistent with this approach that we talk about working backwards, working from the decision back to the data. These PRFAQs at Amazon are these documents that someone writes whenever they have a new idea, whenever they want to innovate, whether it's for external product or for internal product. It includes one page which says, the year is 2024. Amazon just introduced that product. We are actually today, but projecting into the future. What is the problem we solve? What is the need we solve? What is the customer need? Why is it good for Amazon? And then there would be a quote from a customer, a quote from someone at Amazon, why this is something we should be doing. And then come the pressure testing that you talk about, because in addition to the one pager, by the way, very strict one pager press release, again, a simulated press release, and then 3 pages of frequently asked questions. And this is the place where you are expected as the champion of the idea to pressure test your own model, asking, for example, why it's a good idea. You need to put in writing as a champion, think about how smart that question is, why this is not a good idea. You force the champion to pressure test the point of why is it not a good idea? How are we going to make money on this thing? Why didn't our competitor do it? Or why would the customer actually need it? All of the elephants in the room, all of these questions that are likely to be asked in a meeting, you're expected already to put in writing in such document. And of course, it's a living document that keep updated as more questions come about.
As you can tell by now, all 3 professors come with a depth of knowledge and real-life experiences. Listening to them speak, I wondered how any one person, let alone all 3 of them, could synthesize all of the insights into a book. The answer lies in working as a high-performing team where every member does his or her part. Here's Christopher Frank.
I think we have to really put the book into context. The book is an output of teaching this material, one at Columbia for the past 7 years. And it's really that intersection of theory and practice. So we're not only teaching at Columbia, both Paul, Oded, and myself actually apply these every day.
One of the first keys is check your ego at the door, and we're all in this together. And we had to accept that up front, and that was easy to accept in writing the book because we have been teaching together for 7 years. But I think the other thing that we recognize about each other is, although we're teaching this material, and we have been for 7 years, we approach any given problem 3 different ways. So I take very much a systems thinking point of view.
I take the data point of view.
Yeah, and I serve as that, almost connector or bridge between the analysis and data and the business issue.
So when you pull all that together, then you have an interesting story to tell. That interesting story is what our students look and say, wow, there's 3 of you, and there's a cohesive view. That's what we tried to capture.
And I think when approaching this, particularly coming from different views, it can be a limitation, it can be an opportunity. And I think we have taken the opportunity of the different views and complementing each other, bringing the theory and the practice together. And much of the way in which we've done it was really a jazz, as opposed to a linear thinking of, we're going to have Paul be on charge of that and Chris on charge of that. It was much more of a jazz. I write a sentence, Paul adds something from an example that he had, and Chris brings the data into the business problem. And sometimes we even take each other's roles, right? I mean, I would say to Paul, this is too academic, right? Or Paul would tell me, right? I mean, this thing we need to bring more of the theory into it. So doing a jazz, I think, was part of what's important here.
I have a question for you, Oded. When we started the project, I recall asking you, did you feel that we should write something that is of the academic rigor of a peer-reviewed type of work, or something that is more accessible from a business perspective? And clearly we lean to the latter. Why did you make that choice?
I made this choice. There was a more personal reason and the more purpose reason, I would say. The more personal reason was I've done the former many times, and I really wanted to do the latter, right? The real answer, which is a more the purpose reason there, is we've been teaching for 7 years, seeing such great reaction, feeling the impact that we have made on people in terms of making better decisions, and leaning towards that, realizing we actually can do something that has an impact on leaders, that would be picked up by leaders. That was both something new to me, but also an exciting, but also possibly of a different level of impact. One of the skills that we have in the book when we talk about quantitative intuition is this muscle, this ability to go up and down, from business problem down to the data analysis only when needed and back up. There are kind of two types of extreme leaders on this scale, from data to analysis to the business problem. There is the 30,000 feet type manager. It's the manager that feels extremely comfortable up there at the 30,000 feet, always focused on the 8 ball, on the business problem, never cares about the data. In fact, it's a type of leader that we tend to talk about as the one that use data or analysis like a drunken man use a lamppost for support rather than illumination. They already know the answer. They couldn't care less about the data. At the other extreme, we have this other type of extreme manager that I'm sure all of you have met that manager. You send them a 1,000 cell Excel sheet, and they're going to look at every single cell in the Excel, as if the goal of the organization is to produce perfect Excel sheets, right? Of course, the problem with that leader is that they don't see the forest for the trees. They get lost in this Excel as opposed to solving the problem. And the key is, how do we learn to move up and down in this elevator? How do we pressure test a model with things like taking the model to our comfort zone, to places where we have good intuition, like 0 or 1 or infinity? These are some of the skills that we talk about to move up and down this elevator from problem to data, not forgetting about the data, but never forgetting about the problem we're trying to solve.
The amount of data in this data flow is not going to decrease. In fact, it's going to increase, and probably at an exponential rate. Also, the challenge and the pressure to make better decisions, smarter decisions, faster decisions is also going to continually be there, and also be asked of each one of us. So this challenge of increasing data and the need and desire to make faster, smarter decisions is not going away.
Yeah, I mean, my thought on maybe the key learnings from here is, as we are thinking about data and data analysis, don't forget the importance of judgment. Judgment would always stay important in analyzing data, and specifically judgment with respect to what is the problem we are trying to solve. Make sure to spend time with thinking about what is the problem before we go and jump into the data, because there is the urge to go and look at the results. Make sure to define the problem as you're getting into the data, interrogate the data, but not so much from a statistical point of view, but rather from, does it make sense? Does it fit with everything that I know? What are the surprises of the data? And finally, the judgment comes in the form of synthesizing the information. Not just what does the data tell me, but what does it mean and what are we going to do about it?
Decision-making is a team sport. So if one were to take our course, read this book, adopt all of it, and you're the only one that's doing that in your organization, it's still an uphill climb. So the key is to build a tribe. Find that first follower, find that second one, start to find folks, and build some momentum within your organization for people that are intolerant of the waste of time, the waste of resources, and crave techniques to cut through that, techniques to move faster, techniques to open up dialogue, which doesn't necessarily mean to move faster, but to have the real conversation that's critical for your business. That's not a single person activity. Find your tribe, and ideally, we're helping to find the tribe.
That's our episode. Quick closing words from me. There's an inherent pressure the wealth of data in business places on people to be, as Professor Netzer said, a math whiz. And as someone who has never been that, it was so rewarding to hear that that's not a requisite for today's business leaders. Be an expert if that's what you want, but more importantly, be inquisitive about what the data is telling you. Practice judgment, pressure test by asking questions. For the majority of all current and future leaders, this is what will help us lead in a data-driven world. To learn more about how this comprehensive new program brings together faculty, business leaders, and students to explore digital transformation across industries, visit gsb.columbia.edu. And stay connected to all that's happening on this show and at Columbia Business School by following us on social media. You can find us at Columbia_biz. Be sure to follow the show wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss our upcoming episodes. And if you can, leave us a comment and a 5-star review wherever you're listening to this podcast. Thanks for listening.